Hey everybody, I hope you're doing great today. Let's go ahead and get started with our next topic, which is Kantian Ethics. So if you remember last time we looked at consequentialism, which was concerned all about the consequences of an action, right? It's not about saying, hey, let's follow the rules for following the rules. A consequentialist just wants to maximize good consequences and minimize bad consequences. So if following a rule would lead to worse consequences, would lead to bad results, a consequentialist would say, well, the right thing to do would be to break that rule, right? The right thing to do in any situation is the thing that maximizes whatever is good. Whether that's happiness or pleasure or health or wisdom or what have you, a consequentialist just wants to maximize good values, right? She's not concerned with following rules for the sake of following rules. She's concerned with just getting good things. Kantian Ethics approaches this in a very different way. So Kantian Ethics comes from Immanuel Kant in the 18th century, and to get an understanding of how he thinks of rules and why they're more important than just consequences, let's look at the following example. So suppose you are there sitting in traffic, right? It's bumper to bumper, and you would really like to get to where you're going much faster. In fact, everybody would like to get to where they're going much faster, and everybody's well-being would be much better off if they could just get to where they're going much faster. So there you are sitting in your sports car, and you're thinking to yourself, well, if I just pulled out into the emergency lane, I could get to where I'm going much faster. And further, if I do that, it's not like I'm actually causing anybody else any harm. If I'm a consequentialist, I'm going to think about what are my options? Well, I could sit in traffic, or I could cut into the emergency lane, right? That was the idea of consequentialism, was we wanted to think about what are my options, and then which one is going to maximize the overall amount of goodness, the overall amount of well-being. Well, if I sit in traffic, well, then everybody's going to wait in traffic, right? But if I cut out in front of traffic, then at least one person isn't going to wait in traffic. And sure, that's going to turn out to be me, but the point is, I am increasing the overall well-being in the world. So if I cut out into traffic, I'm increasing the total well-being that there is in the world, right? Because I have to wait less. It's not as if I'm making everybody else suffer by cutting out into traffic. It's not as if I'm making them wait longer if I did that. Right? Suppose my exit is just right there, just a half mile away. I know that there's no emergency vehicles coming. Everything is going to be just fine. Why shouldn't I do it if, by the consequences, that seems like it's going to maximize the good stuff? Why shouldn't I do it if it seems like that's going to maximize the good results, the good consequences? That's Kant's interpretation of consequentialism. The consequentialism would value people not wasting their time. Option 1 leads to a greater overall amount of waste of time than option 2. Therefore, consequentialism, Kant thinks, would say, okay, you should go with option 2. Option 2 would be the right one. You should cut out into traffic, because doing so would create a world with more overall well-being. So this, though, Kant thinks is clearly wrong. And this might be something that a lot of you just have a deep sympathy with, right? If you've ever seen somebody cut out into the emergency lane while on the highway, a lot of us don't like that very much, right? And so Kant would agree with that sort of thing. He was around before highways, but his point is still the same. Kant's thinking about any situation in which you could shirk your responsibilities, leave everybody else to fulfill theirs, and in general, there's no bad consequences. And he thinks that's still a bad thing. That you shouldn't be doing things just because there are good or bad consequences. He thinks you should be doing something simply because it's the right thing to do. And fundamentally, he thinks rightness has to do with fairness, and there's something crucially unfair about this. So, like, another example would be like paying taxes, right? He thinks, well, if you just want to stop paying taxes, meanwhile leaving everybody else to pay taxes just because you think your contribution isn't going to make a difference, even if it doesn't make a difference, even if it doesn't have big and bad consequences, Kant just thinks that's unfair. So Kant thinks there really are rules that we should follow. It's not just about maximizing good stuff in good places. We should do some things for the sake. We should do some things because that's the right thing to do. So Kant's goal is going to be trying to find out what are those rules, right? What is it that we should all follow just for the sake of it being the right thing? Not because doing so will be pragmatic or doing so will be practical or doing so will result in good things, but just because that's the fair and respectable thing to do. And in particular, Kant is thinking about treating yourself as an exception. He thinks if you're treating yourself as special, as somehow different from other people, he thinks there's going to be something fundamentally irrational about that. To understand this, let's think about this in terms of imperatives. So if you remember, an imperative is like a command, right? You're saying you should do something, right? Close the door, or don't kill people, right? These are imperatives. These are statements to say, do this thing, or don't do this thing, right? It's a command. This is opposed to something like a declarative statement, right? Like saying the door is closed, right? Or this person harmed this other person, right? You're just declaring something. So what Kant wants to do is he wants to try to figure out what are the correct imperative statements? What are the correct commands that we should follow? So he's thinking about these as commands of reason to do something. So we can think about these in two different categories. Hypothetical imperatives are commands of reason to do something based on your goals, right? They're hypothetical. If you have a particular goal, then you should go about doing something. If you want to be a guitarist, then you should play guitar. It's not irrational for you to not want to play guitar if you don't want to be a guitarist, but if you want to be a guitarist, then you should play the guitar, right? You should practice the guitar. If you want to eat cheesecake, then you should buy or bake a cheesecake, right? So the point of all these is that they're hypothetical. They're all contingent on whatever your desires are. So hypothetical imperatives are a bit more straightforward, but categorical imperatives are really where our focus is going to be. A categorical imperative, on the other hand, is a command of reason to do something regardless of what you want, right? So the point of a categorical imperative is forget the consequences, forget the results, forget what your goals are. Just do something because that's the right thing to do, right? So that's Kant's focus. Kant wants to find out what are the things that we should do simply because we are rational beings. That anything, if it's able to think clearly, it should follow these rules. Ultimately, Kant thinks if you do something like drive out into the emergency lane, it's not just immoral, but it's irrational. Because he thinks, basing that action on a false belief, on a belief that you're somehow an exception to the rules. Kant in general is thinking about these categorical imperatives as things that don't admit exception. That no matter who you are, you should follow these rules. You should do these things. So that's what Kant's goal is, right? Trying to find these rules that we should all follow regardless of who we are. In the next video, we're going to explore some particular candidates for what these rules might be. In the next video, we're going to look at some particular candidates for what this rule might be.